Eleanor Harper had always been careful with her life. She planned everything meticulously, from her career moves to her small circle of friends. And even the weekends she allowed herself to breathe. Life was orderly, predictable, and quiet. She liked it that way. But on that rainy Thursday evening in Seattle, everything felt like it was shifting, as if the city itself had conspired to pull her into a story she hadn't expected. She stood under the dim glow of a flickering neon cafe sign, rain dripping from the brim of her coat, and watched as 4 familiar faces entered, one after the other. The first was Alex, her college confidant, whose easy smile had once made even the most stressful days bearable. Seeing him again after 10 years caused an odd flutter in her chest, part nostalgia, part anticipation, part something she couldn't quite name. Alex carried himself with the same quiet confidence. But there was an older, wiser air about him now, one that made Eleanor feel the weight of time they had both endured. Ryan came next, his energy impossible to miss, his laugh full and genuine. Cut through the background noise of the cafe and instantly brought a warmth to Eleanor's heart. She remembered afternoons from years ago when Ryan's humor had been the glue holding her small circle together. Seeing him again, she realized how much she had missed the lightness he brought into her life. A lightness she hadn't realized she craved until now. Daniel followed, calm and composed as always. His presence was steady, like a rock amidst the flow of her life. Eleanor had always admired his quiet strength and thoughtful words. He had a way of making people feel safe. And just being near him again brought a sense of comfort she didn't know she was longing for. His gentle smile and the subtle way he nodded in greeting reminded her why she had trusted him with parts of her heart she had never shared with anyone else. Finally, Mason arrived, his entrance a mixture of confidence and mischief. Eleanor felt her heartbeat skip at the sight of him. Mason had always been the unpredictable one, the one who made life exciting and unpredictable. He had a charm that was impossible to ignore, a spark that made everything feel just a little more intense. Seeing him now, she was reminded of the thrill he had once brought into her days. A thrill she hadn't known she had missed until this moment. For a brief instant, Eleanor felt overwhelmed. All 4 of them were here, the people who had shaped different chapters of her life. Alex, Ryan, Daniel, and Mason each, representing a distinct part of her past. A piece of herself she had left behind or tucked away. She realized, with a quiet shock, that she wanted them all, not in the sense the world might misunderstand, but in the sense that she longed for connection, for the feelings and memories each one evoked. She wanted laughter, trust, excitement, comfort. She wanted the richness of human experience in its full measure. Something she hadn't allowed herself to embrace for years. The cafe was small and warm, a sharp contrast to the rain-soaked streets outside. As they gathered around a large wooden table, ear filled with the soft murmur of conversation and the occasional clink of coffee cups, Alex, ever the storyteller, immediately launched into anecdotes from their college days, weaving in humor and nostalgia. Ryan laughed loudly, his energy infecting everyone. And soon Eleanor found herself laughing along, the sound ringing unexpectedly pure in her own ears. Daniel listened more than he spoke, but when he contributed, his words were measured, meaningful, and carried a weight that made Eleanor pay attention. Mason leaned back in his chair, teasing and playful, prompting smiles and eye rolls alike, his presence magnetic and impossible to ignore as the evening wore on. Eleanor noticed something about herself she hadn't expected. She felt alive in a way she hadn't in years, not because of one person, but because of all of them together. The mixture of personalities, the interplay of familiarity and surprise, reminded her of the beauty of human connection. She realized that life had been too quiet lately, too orderly, and perhaps this reunion was exactly the spark she needed. She felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension, the kind that comes with knowing your world is about to expand in ways you can't yet predict. They shared stories of successes and failures, heartbreaks and joys. Alex talked about his art, how he had finally held his first exhibition after years of work. and Eleanor was struck by the depth of his passion. Ryan recounted his travels and the people he had met, making Eleanor laugh until her sides ached. Daniel spoke quietly about his career and the small victories that mattered most to him. And she felt the pull of admiration and comfort. Mason, as usual, told stories with a mischievous twist, keeping everyone on their toes and adding a sense of playful unpredictability to the evening. Eleanor noticed how each of them brought out a different side of her. With Alex, she was thoughtful and reflective. With Ryan, she was carefree and playful. With Daniel, she felt calm and grounded. With Mason, she felt bold and alive. It was an emotional revelation. The realization that different relationships could fulfill different needs, each one essential in its own way. The thought made her pulse quicken and her mind swirl with possibilities as the night drew to a close. There was a moment of quiet between the laughter and conversation. Eleanor realized that something had shifted inside her. She wasn't just enjoying old friendships. She was rediscovering parts of herself she had almost forgotten. The longing she had felt, the yearning for connection. The desire to feel fully seen and understood was all returning in waves. She understood that she had wanted all four of them not to complicate her life or to satisfy a fleeting whim, but because each one represented a facet of life she needed: warmth, joy, stability, and passion. When it was time to leave, they parted with promises to meet again. Eleanor walked home through the rainy streets, her mind a whirl of thoughts and emotions. She realized that life had a way of bringing people together at the exact moment they were ready. And perhaps this reunion was one of those rare, meaningful alignments. She felt anticipation for what was to come, a sense that the story was far from over, that this night had opened a door she hadn't known existed by the time she reached her apartment. Eleanor was exhausted but exhilarated. She thought about how strange and beautiful life could be, how the people who mattered most could reappear when you least expected it. She felt a quiet determination to embrace whatever came next, to allow herself to feel, to laugh, to be challenged, and to grow. The night had reminded her that life wasn't about choosing one path or one person exclusively. Sometimes it was about embracing the richness that came from multiple connections, multiple experiences, and multiple forms of love and friendship. As she settled onto her couch, Eleanor reflected on the evening. She could still hear Ryan's laughter echoing in her ears. Feel Daniel's calm presence, remember Alex's thoughtful gaze, and sense Mason's mischievous energy lingering in the air. The thought of all four of them together, each one offering a unique piece of what she craved emotionally, made her heart beat faster. She understood that she wanted them all, not in a selfish or possessive way, but because life had taught her that joy, comfort, excitement, and understanding weren't mutually exclusive. They could coexist just as they had tonight, just as they could in the days ahead before she drifted into sleep. Eleanor made a silent promise to herself. She would allow herself to embrace this chapter fully. She wouldn't shy away from the emotions, the laughter, or the unexpected connections. She would let her heart be open, trusting that life, in its unpredictable way, had a plan that was bigger than she could see. And as the rain pattered softly against her window, she felt a quiet thrill in anticipation that the coming days would bring more laughter, more warmth, and more moments that reminded her why she had wanted all four, and now, perhaps, was ready to have them all in her life. The week after that rainy Thursday, Eleanor Harper found her life transformed in ways she hadn't anticipated. The cafe reunion had been just the beginning, a spark that ignited something in her heart. Suddenly, her carefully ordered life felt fuller, louder, and somehow warmer. Each evening seemed to bring a new gathering, a new way for the four people from her past to enter her present. It began with Alex. He invited her to his art exhibition downtown, and Eleanor found herself wandering through the gallery, mesmerized by his work. The colors, the brushstrokes, the way he captured emotion on canvas, it all spoke to her in a way words never could. Alex moved among the guests with quiet confidence, but whenever he glanced her way, his eyes held a private warmth meant only for her. As they stood together in front of a painting depicting a stormy ocean, Eleanor felt something shift. She realized she had missed this kind of connection, the subtle understanding that comes from knowing someone deeply. Someone who once knew the inside of your mind and heart. Then there was Ryan. He had a way of appearing just when Eleanor needed to laugh, to feel light, to remember the joy in life. One evening, he surprised her with a picnic in a small park near her apartment. The grass was damp from a light drizzle, the air smelled of earth and fresh rain, and the city seemed far away. Ryan's energy was infectious. He talked animatedly about his recent travels, his voice carrying a warmth that made Eleanor's chest feel light. She laughed at his stories, truly laughed, the kind of laughter that leaves your cheeks aching and your heart full. With Ryan, Eleanor rediscovered a carefree side of herself, a side she had buried under routines and responsibilities. He reminded her that life could be bright, playful, and full of spontaneous joy. Daniel's presence was quieter, but no less powerful. On a late evening, Eleanor found herself walking with him along the waterfront, the city lights reflecting in the gentle ripples of the water. Daniel didn't try to impress her. He simply listened, shared his thoughts, and offered her comfort without demanding anything in return. He had always had a way of making her feel grounded, and now more than ever, Eleanor realized how much she valued that steadiness. His calm presence was a balm to her sometimes chaotic thoughts, and in his quiet way, he made her feel seen and understood. Eleanor began to notice that with Daniel, her mind could rest. She didn't have to explain herself or justify her feelings. She could simply exist. And that was enough. And then there was Mason. Mason's appearances were always a little unpredictable, a little thrilling. He had a charm that was impossible to ignore. A mischievous glint in his eyes that reminded Eleanor of days she had spent daring to feel alive. One evening, she met him at a small bookstore she often visited, and he had somehow arranged for her favorite first-edition books to be waiting on a table. They spent hours flipping through pages, sharing stories about why certain books mattered, and laughing at memories sparked by old tales. Mason reminded her that life could be exciting, passionate, and full of moments that took your breath away. With him, Eleanor felt bold and free, unafraid to embrace the thrill of living in the moment. The days blurred together as Eleanor navigated this unexpected whirlwind of attention, affection, and presence. She felt emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. It was overwhelming at times, confusing at others, but always alive. Each person brought something unique into her life, something she hadn't realized she had been missing. Alex offered depth and reflection. Ryan brought lightness and laughter. Daniel gave calm and trust, and Mason stirred excitement and intensity. Together, they painted her life with a palette she hadn't known she needed. Eleanor also began to notice how the four men interacted with one another. Their personalities didn't clash, at least not in ways that created tension. Instead, it was like each of them occupied a different part of a spectrum of emotion. And Eleanor found herself appreciating the balance they collectively brought into her life. There were moments when Alex would exchange knowing glances with Daniel, or Ryan would nudge Mason playfully, and Eleanor couldn't help but smile at the ease with which they all fit together. It was not about competition or jealousy. It was about the harmony of four lives connecting with hers in meaningful ways. One evening, they all met together at a cozy restaurant near the waterfront. The lights were soft, the music gentle, and the conversation flowed naturally. Eleanor watched them, feeling the warmth of familiarity and connection. She realized that she didn't have to choose one person to feel complete. Instead, she could embrace the fullness of all four connections, allowing each one to nourish a different part of her heart. It was a revelation that brought tears to her eyes, not of sadness, but of profound gratitude and understanding. As the night progressed, Eleanor felt herself opening up in ways she hadn't in years. She shared her dreams, her fears, and her memories with a raw honesty that surprised even her. Alex listened with quiet intensity, nodding thoughtfully. Ryan laughed at the lighter moments, his eyes sparkling with shared joy. Daniel offered steady reassurance, and Mason leaned in with a teasing smile that made her pulse quicken. Each response was perfectly attuned to the part of her he resonated with. And Eleanor felt the full weight of her emotions, joy, longing, comfort, and excitement all at once. The beauty of this experience wasn't just in the attention or the connection. It was in the way it reminded Eleanor of herself. She had spent so long compartmentalizing her life, keeping parts of herself hidden to maintain control and order. But now, surrounded by people who cared in different ways, she realized she could let her walls down. She could feel fully, laugh freely, and even allow herself to be vulnerable without fear. It was liberating, exhilarating, and terrifying all at once. There were moments of doubt, too. Eleanor sometimes wondered if it was too much, if having all four in her life could ever be sustainable. She questioned whether she was being selfish or greedy. But each time these thoughts crept in, she reminded herself that life wasn't always about choosing the easiest path. It was about embracing the moments that made her heart feel alive. And with Alex, Ryan, Daniel, and Mason, her heart had never felt so alive. One evening, after a long day that had included coffee with Alex, a walk with Daniel, a lunch with Ryan, and a bookstore visit with Mason, Eleanor sat on her balcony watching the city lights shimmer across the water. She reflected on the whirlwind week, the laughter, the deep conversations, the quiet moments, and the playful mischief. She realized that wanting all four had never been about possession. It had been about longing for friendship, for understanding, for excitement, for comfort, and for love in its many forms. And in this realization, she felt complete in a way she hadn't expected. The next day brought another gathering. This time a quiet evening at Eleanor's apartment. The four of them arrived, each bringing a small part of themselves with thoughtful observations about a book she had recently read. Ryan with a bottle of wine and his contagious cheer. Daniel with a homemade dessert he had insisted on bringing. And Mason with a playful challenge for a board game. The evening was lively, warm, and full of subtle connections that spoke louder than words. Eleanor noticed how easily they all fit into her space, how natural it felt to have them around, and how much her heart had expanded to include them all. As the night drew to a close, Eleanor felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. She had spent the week discovering how rich and layered her life could be. When she allowed herself to embrace every meaningful connection, she had laughed until she cried, shared thoughts she hadn't spoken aloud in years, and felt emotions she had long buried. She realized that life wasn't about choosing between what made her heart happy. It was about embracing the full spectrum of joy, comfort, excitement, and love that it could offer. Before she went to bed, Eleanor looked at the city skyline one last time. She thought about Alex, Ryan, Daniel, and Mason not in isolation, but as part of a tapestry of connection, a reminder that her heart could hold more than she had ever imagined. She felt gratitude, anticipation, and a quiet thrill at what was still to come. For the first time in a long time, she understood that sometimes life doesn't ask you to choose. Sometimes it asks you to open your heart fully, trust the journey, and let the connections you've longed for all come together in a way that feels right, natural, and profoundly beautiful. As Eleanor finally lay down to sleep, her phone buzzed softly. A message appeared from an unknown number. The journey is just beginning. Be ready for what comes next. Her heart raced, a mix of excitement and curiosity. Eleanor smiled, feeling the weight of the past week settle into a new sense of possibility. She knew one thing for certain: life had brought all four of them to her, each in a way that mattered deeply. And now she was ready for the next chapter. Whatever it might hold, the night ended not with dramatic declarations or sweeping gestures, but with a quiet, unspoken understanding that sometimes hearts don't need to choose, they need to embrace. And Eleanor, for the first time in years, was ready to do just that.